Hello everyone. Before starting my presentation on the ideas of Karl Marx as a pioneer in sociology, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ganesha Somayaji. I teach sociology in the University of Goa. I studied my MA in sociology in the University of Mysore from 1985 to 87. After that, in the year 88, I came to Goa to the college, MES College of Arts and Commerce, Zuarinagar, Goa, to teach sociology. After teaching 10 years there, in the year 1999, I came to the Department of Sociology, Goa University, and since then, I am teaching sociology there. Under the auspices of the Alumni Association, Department of Sociology, University of Mysore, I am presenting these ideas. I am very happy that I am part of that association and proud to be member of that and consider it as my privilege to get this opportunity. I am starting to talk to you on Karl Marx as one of the pioneers of sociology. Let us first try to know what do you mean by pioneers. Pioneer means those who are responsible for starting and then consolidating. For example, if you take the Department of Sociology of University of Mysore, it is one of the pioneering institutions in starting sociology as an academic discipline in India. In the same way, we are trying to understand the pioneers who contributed to the emergence and development of sociology as a distinctive discipline. Karl Marx is one of the pioneers of sociology. Let us try to locate Karl Marx in the period where he lived. And he lived in the stage of modernity in world history. And therefore, I will be first associating Karl Marx with other pioneers. The other pioneers of sociology, Emil Durkheim, who lived from 1858 to 1917, Karl Max Weber, who lived from 1864 to 1920, and Marx lived and wrote, therefore, in the 19th century. 19th century is the heyday of modernity. World has passed through, especially the European world, has passed through the such stages as ancient stage and medieval stage. And from that medieval stage, modernity has harbingered new thing in European life, and sweeping changes have taken place in society during this time, and these sweeping changes constituted the subject matter of sociology by these pioneers. To make sense of what is modern world, what are the causes and consequences of these changes in modern world constitute the subject matter of sociology. Among the three, one is the most influential figure, in my opinion, is Karl Marx in shaping the ideas on society, culture, and economy, and we are considering him now. To begin with, I would like to start with Marx, his life and works. And after that, I will be giving a brief outline of the major contributions of Karl Marx, and then I will speak on two specific important contributions of Karl Marx. If you take into account the biographical details of Marx, he hails from Germany. Born on May 5 in 1818 in a small town by name Trier in Germany, he was of Jewish parentage initially, but later on they were converted to Protestantism because of problems associated with Jewish life. And he received his doctorate in law in the year 1841, and then for a brief while worked as a journalist, and then he moved to Paris in 1843 to study political economy. From jurisprudence, Marx's interest started to lean towards economy, political economy, and then the critique of the economic conditions of contemporary Europe. And in Paris, he got himself involved in economic question, especially the plight of the workers. He was very much open to see, and then he started his lifelong association with another aristocratic scholar of the time by name Frederick Engels, and the lifelong companionship between the two continued until Marx's end. And he moved to London in 1850 and dedicated his life to detailed analysis and critique of capitalist economy, which is the modernity of his time. Emergence of capitalism for Marx is emergence of modernity. And I will try to highlight major works often quoted by the scholars. And his earliest major work is Holy Family, written in the year 1845, which is a polemical writing attacking the young Hegelians. To give you a brief background, to start with, in Germany, Marx came under the influence of the works of an influential German philosopher who died in the year 1831 by name George Hegel. And Hegel has developed dialectic materialist ideology. According to dialectic idealism was developed by dialectic idealism was developed by Hegel, and Marx was influenced by the ideas of Hegel. And in due course, Marx realized that ideas do not emerge in an empty stomach, and idealism has to be replaced with materialism, which I am going to talk after some time. And here, Marx developed a critique of Hegelian viewpoints in his book, The Holy Family. In the year 1847, Marx developed German Ideology, another book. In this, he rejected hitherto German philosophy and started to outline materialist theory of history, which remained a focal point of Marx's ideas throughout his life. And in German ideology, he rejected earlier philosophies of Germany, where attention was given only to interpret history. Therefore, in his thesis on Feuerbach, another small pamphlet of 3 pages, the last thesis of critique of Feuerbach was total rejection of philosophers' interpretation, only interpretation of reality. And he told that philosophers of the world have hitherto interpreted the world. Now time has come to change it. Program of action for philosophers, the idea of praxis developed by Marx in his critique of the existing German philosophy. And then came, in the year 1848, Marx's the great propaganda literature, the Communist Manifesto, written for the Communist Party of France. And in that, it was written in association with Frederick Engels. In that, Marx gave a clarion call to workers of the world to unite. Thesis on class struggle got its seed by Marx in this book. And in this book, it is he conceived and urged the workers to unite themselves and forge struggle against the oppressors and oppression. And next comes a publication in 1859. It was the contribution to a critique of political economy. And this book's preface is highly read by intellectuals later time. He clearly stated his economic interpretation of history. And very wrongly, Marx is considered as economic determinist. And he cannot be considered as economic determinist. He was an interpreter of society on the basis of economic foundations. These ideas are found in his preface to a contribution to a critique of political economy. Then comes the magnum opus of Marx and Engels in 3 volumes, The first volume was published in the year 1867, and remaining through, he worked throughout his life until his death. And these are the brief commentary on major works of Karl Marx. Then from this, we will go to identify 4 major contributions of Karl Marx. First is dialectical materialism, then economic determinism or economic interpretation of history. I prefer to call economic determinism as economic interpretation of history. Marx was an open, flexible philosopher. According to him, nothing can have a determining impact on human life. And then class struggle and alienation. From this, I am proceeding to Marx's ideas on dialectical materialism. As I told earlier, dialectical materialism of Marx has its roots in his Hegelian influence. Though later on Marx revolted against the ideas of Hegel, revolted against in the sense rejected the ideas of Hegel and developed his own interpretation of history and reality. His indebtedness to Hegel continues throughout, in the sense, considering reality as a continuous occurring and not a stagnant status quo is the contribution of Hegel, which Marx continued even after his rejection of major influence of Hegel like idealism. And here, dialectic is, Hegel is responsible for introducing this idea of contradiction and change. Reality is conceived of contradiction in the form of ideas. Hegel conceived the entire reality in the form of supreme reality, the world spirit. And the world spirit manifests itself in the form of ideas. And these manifestations are not permanent. Once it will be manifested in the form of an idea, and that is thesis, then there will be opposition to that, that is antithesis, and the amalgamation of the thesis and antithesis is synthesis. The actualization of supreme ideas, supreme spirit takes place in the state of his time. In a sense, Hegel provided this idealistic determinism. And what is very important in Hegel to take is his ideas on conceiving reality in the form of history, which is continually changing on the basis of contradiction, conflict, and synthesis. Marx borrowed this dialectic idea from Hegel and rejected his ideational viewpoint. Dialectical idealism has been changed into dialectical materialism. How we live? We live by working. Walking with the help of our 2 legs and working with the help of our hands. The existence of mankind is dependent on using hand and feet to produce. Therefore, production or the material world constitute reality, and mind, how you think, depends upon how you work and what you earn. The necessities, comforts, and luxuries of your life decide the way you think. Therefore, thinking does not come first. What comes first is our work. And in a sarcastic way, Marx also somewhere quipped that Hegel was walking on his head. I am only turning him upside down and make him walk on his legs. This one sarcastic quip. Okay. Now, what Marx did with relate to his dialectical materialism? He rejected the role Hegel assigned to philosophy. Marx decided that philosophers until his time were only interpreting the world. They were giving various treatises on what is reality, but they were only understanding reality and not trying to find out the root causes of the miseries of people. And there is no action plan in philosophy to change the world. The time has now come to change world, and from philosophers we should move on to economic interpreters and policy makers. And he also rejected role of ideas in history. Ideas do not come as primary and prime for Marx. Ideas are the result of where we stay, how we stay, where we work, with whom we work, and how much we get back as salary or wage for our work. Therefore, he rejected the role of ideas in history. And instead, he highlighted contradictions in material life as prime movers of history. Marx conceived of history as a continuous unfolding of contradictions between two polar opposite classes. The history of all hitherto existing societies had these two polar opposite classes. When the contradiction between the two reaches the zenith or pinnacle, then there will be revolution and new epoch will emerge. In Europe, from ancient to medieval, feudal, and feudal to capitalistic era, the movement took place on the basis of a dialectical materialistic contradiction between the haves and have-nots in these various epochs of history. Now, in Marx's time, he tells, we have reached the third and decisive stage of history, that is the capitalistic stage, where there are two polarized classes, the haves and have-nots, the oppressors, oppressed and the oppressor. And the dialectic will be between the two, that is oppressor and the oppressed. And the dialectic between the two will lead to the synthesis, and that is the communist regime. And his dialectical materialistic approach leads to his ideas on economic interpretation of history. Let us therefore now go into Marx's economic interpretation of history. I have spoken to you on the idea of dialectical materialism of Karl Marx. Dialectical materialism is nothing but interpretation of history from the parlance of economy. And as Marx gave lot of importance to material life or economy, sometimes he is misunderstood to be an economic determinist. Actually, what Marx gave is an economic interpretation of history. And therefore, now I am trying to clarify you his ideas on what constitutes the economic reality of any given society, and then what are the components of Marx's ideas on economic interpretation of history. To know his ideas on economic interpretation of history, we should know what Marx conceives as a historical condition of any society. A given society, in his opinion, is based on two aspects. One is relations of production and another constitute forces of production. Relations of production refer to all concrete relationships which human beings establish in their day-to-day life when they are living. And they are living means they are producing. They are entering into a work situation. As early as age 10 in capitalist Europe, children were working. Men, women, children, men, women of all ages were working for quite a long time, and hence relations of production refer to the relations which human beings enter into in the context of productive activity. Forces of production refers to the various modes of production, instruments of production, and ownership of production. And in relation to economic aspect of reality, Marx has identified many ideas. Out of that, Raymond Aron has succinctly summarized 7 important features. I would like to show you the book by Raymond Aron, which I have referred. It is Main Currents in Sociological Thought, Part 1 by Raymond Aron. And what are these 7 points or 7 features of Marx's economic interpretation of history? We will go one by one. The first is, men enter into relations independent of their will. That means consciously we will not enter into any relationship. We were influenced by the society or social structure, especially the exploitative social system that determines what type of relations we are entering. Then the second one, every society, this is also very, very important idea of economic interpretation of history. Every society contains the economic base or infrastructure, and on this infrastructure is built the superstructure. What is superstructure? Superstructure is nothing but all other achievements of man, juridical, cultural, aesthetic, religious, and so politics. All other aspects of life, that is superstructure, is built on the basis of the infrastructure, that is economic base. And this idea made many people consider Marx as an economic determinist, whatever it may be. But he tells that the economic base decides what type of ideologies develop. Therefore, idea and ideologies are dependent on the material conditions. Then the third feature of economic interpretation is that historical movement is the result of the growing contradiction between the infrastructure and superstructure. This is what I told. Economic interpretation of history is nothing but continuation of his dialectical materialism. In the changes in the infrastructure sometimes do not accept changes in the superstructure, or vice versa. The contradiction between the two lead to various types of struggles. The fourth feature is the result of the growing contradiction is class polarization and class struggle. This is what I was telling in the last point. That means when there is contradiction between the relations of production and the modes of production, there will be tussle and tension. The two classes, those who own the means of production and those who work in this relationship, are polarized into class struggle. And the formation of class and class struggle constitute another important idea that has to be discussed in greater detail. And it is but part of economic interpretation of history. The fifth point is dialectic between the forces and relations also implies a theory of revolution. When there is contradiction in classes and when there is class struggle, there will be terrible change, sudden change in social structure. And revolution is an important part of Marx's idea of economic interpretation of history. And in this dialectic, what is important is we consciously do not engage in change. That shows how Marx is very, very flexible and very, very scientific in his understanding. Marx's socialist ideas are scientific ideas for that reason. In this dialectic, Marx tells, not the consciousness that determines reality, but the reality determines consciousness. Though we are all thinking human beings, our thinking is not as per our consciousness. Our thinking is as per the dictations of the external world. Then also part of this economic interpretation of history is the features of modes of production and relations of production in various stages of world history. These stages are Asiatic, ancient, feudal, and the capitalist. Out of these four, the Asiatic refers to the Asian mode of production, of which Marx did not speak much. The other three, the ancient to feudal and feudal to capitalist, constitute the movement of European society. And after class struggle and contradiction and this revolution will occur, and from communist the European society will, from capitalist the European society will move to the communist stage. Thus, some kind of stagial theory of economic history has been given by Marx in his economic interpretation of history. These are the references of my presentation. And in the next presentation, I will be speaking on other two major ideas of Karl Marx. Thank you for listening to my presentation.